ask him, could you give a brief history of Trinity House and its role?
Well, as it's been going for 400 years, it's a bit difficult. But it was started by, or at least it was founded by Henry VIII in 1540 with a charter. And it was really a very interesting concept, that the idea of a lighthouse service being organised by mariners for mariners set a very interesting precedent, as it were, as a pattern. And basically the same system has been running ever since. It's added buoyage and pilotage and various other things, but in practice the concept of Henry VIII has remained very much the same.
And have members of the royal family always been connected with Trinity House, and in what capacity?
Not always, no. Certainly not since, I don't think between Henry VIII and Queen Victoria, I don't think a great many, well, some were, yes. I think the Duke of York, who became James II, was associated with Trinity House, and occasionally there were members of the family who were involved. But I suppose since about 1880 or something like that, I think there's been a member of the family has been Master of Trinity House more or less continuously since then. Of course, there were all sorts of ups and downs in Trinity House in its 400 years. I think during the Commonwealth, for instance, it was more or less brought to an end, and then it was resuscitated afterwards. It had a pretty colourful history, but in practice it's been doing the same thing all that time.
And could you describe your role as Master of Trinity House?
Non-executive head. I don't get involved in directly in the administration or management of Trinity House, but I attend the annual court and service, and then if I can, I go to the board meetings if it's possible, and of course I read the minutes of what comes along, and being as it were an ex-mariner, I take an interest in what they're doing. I sometimes make comments, sometimes not.
In your travels around the world, have you had the opportunity to visit other lighthouses and lighthouse authorities? And if so, how do they compare with ours?
Well, no, not. I've visited other lighthouses, both active and passive, as it were. No, I haven't visited any other lighthouse authorities, but I've always, in a sense, if you were at sea at any stage, lighthouse is very much part of your daily existence, and you're interested in them either as marks during the day or, of course, as lights at night. And so if you pass famous lighthouses, it's always an interesting sight to see the one, for instance, down at the bottom of the Gulf of the Red Sea, and there are curious ones in the Red Sea. There's one off Port Sudan, for instance, sits on a coral reef. There are famous lighthouses which, when you see them, you suddenly realise you're actually seeing something historical.
If you've seen other lighthouses, then you must have met keepers. So are keepers all the world over basically the same breed of men, or do you see similarities more than differences?
Well, I should have thought that they must share certain characteristics if people want to shut themselves away for long periods of time. Normally it requires a court to do that, but lighthouse keepers appear to do it voluntarily and live in pretty cramped conditions for a long time. I suppose you must have certain characteristics that must be shared across the board.
And when you have returned home by sea, during your time in the Royal Navy and in your travel since, what did you feel when you saw your first British lighthouse?
Well, it was always pleasant to feel that you were home again. I think the interesting thing coming home now, particularly if you come up past Ushant into the Channel, is the whole of the Channel routing system, which was partially developed by Trinity House. But it's it caused a great deal of argument at the time how the people using the channel going into the North Sea and coming out of the North Sea, how it should be organised. And for instance, there are now 1, 2, 3, 4, there are 6 lanes, with the 2 main lanes up and down in the middle, and then 2 coastal lanes. Because a lot of people argued that there should have been just 2 lanes, as it were, but then they said, oh, well, you would have to turn across them. I mean, it was a very interesting argument as to how it would work out.
Out of a long line of distinguished masters, you will be the last that actually has lighthouse keepers working in the lighthouse service. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, working in lighthouses as lighthouse keepers, yes. Well, I mean, it is it's very sad, but I think any service that has been going for a very long time, it's of course there's a sort of nostalgia about it, the feeling that something is being lost. But I suppose you could argue that things have always been changing and that we have to adapt to what happens.
I'm from the old school of if it isn't broken, don't fix it. So, can you explain to me why the Lighthouse Service is automating all of its lighthouses?
Well, I think the answer is that it's partly economic, and partly the fact that it's technically possible to do it now, technologically possible to do it. I think with any organisation, the real problem is the managing of people who are employed in it. And there comes a point when the service they're providing becomes, in a sense, too expensive for the people who are making use of the service. I don't think the Trinity House would have changed the system and got rid of manned lighthouses unless there'd been very strong pressure from the shipping companies to say, why have we got to pay such heavy light dues? And the only answer you can do is to try and make it cheaper. And when you look around at how you can do that, well, you automate them, because the investments in automation is quite expensive. But on the other hand, once it's in, it is going to provide a cheaper service. It's sad, but that's the way economics works.
The way of the world. In the years that I have been a keeper, most of the keepers I have met have been involved in a rescue at sea in some form or other. There have been many other examples in our history, such as Grace Darling and her father at the Longstone Light. When we are fully automatic, all this will cease. So how does modern technology make our seas and shorelines any safer?
Well, I think for one thing, the Coast Guard service will still be in position, which is there in the sense to monitor the coast and to provide assistance if necessary. Quite obviously it doesn't apply, they won't be able to cover it in the same way as lighthouse keepers. But I think even in the days when lighthouses were manned, it was you had to be pretty lucky to run ashore somewhere near a lighthouse. In fact, the most unlikely place you were going to run ashore was somewhere near a lighthouse, in effect. So although it was obviously people, lighthouse keepers, given the opportunity, did go to the rescue. But I think the other thing is that navigation is now anyway at sea for anything, well, practically everything is in a sense itself automated, that it has GPS and various navigation systems, Loran and Decca and so on. So in many ways the chances of just running aground are probably less now than they used to be. And in fact, I can't think of an occasion when it might have been possible in recent years for lighthouse keepers to give a better service than, let's say, a helicopter on sea air rescue duties.
The crews of manned lightships are all gone. The lighthouse keeper will surely follow. As master of Trinity House, is there anything you would like to say to these men, past and present, for the job they have done?
Well, I suppose thank you is about all I can say. It's undoubtedly the service has been enormously appreciated. I'm sure, by all seamen throughout the period that the Lighthouse Service has been in existence. And I think anybody who's ever been to sea and been responsible for ships at sea would agree that we owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to the people who manned the lighthouses and made sure that they were working when we needed them, because until modern technology with radar and radio fixing and all other sorts of navigation came along, we were completely dependent on visual navigation. And of course, lighthouses, both day and night, played an extremely important part. So there's no question, I think, that all mariners would say how very much the service was appreciated and how much they depended on it.
Thank you very much.